Hi guys from Pax Europiana. The day is setting, you see the sun is setting over Schönbrunn, and I would like to discuss on this 5th month, whatever, it's not the anniversary, but it's 5 months now that this war has started, and I would like to discuss the reason for this war. And also question anybody who thinks it's justified, because there is no reason for this war. There is no justifiable reason for this war. The only way and the only reason why this escalation on the 24th of February has started is because Putin wanted it. And there was no justifiable reason for that. Not a single one. Let's never forget. What were the facts? He has already occupied Crimea and more or less half of the two oblasts, Bundesländer regions of Lugansk and Donetsk. And there was already no reason for that, because there was no human rights violation of Ukraine before 2014 when he started this war. People in Crimea and in Donbass have lived freely, and there were no human rights violations before Putin started the invasion. Point. Point. There was no discrimination inside Ukraine. They were not living spectacularly rich, but there was no human rights violation. Point. And then he came, and then there were massive human rights violations in Crimea and in occupied Donbass. He did it. The Russian troops did it. The Russian, whatever, separatists, however you call this kind of statelets. Then they were discriminating and doing massive human rights violations in Crimea and in Donbass. The Russians are guilty for that one. And when he then, for whatever reasons, let's speculate, either because, my theory, because he is a bit old and like many dictators he saw his time will end and he wanted to clean the house in a way and finish all his projects because he thought Ukraine will be too successful. One reason of his motivation why he escalated in 2022. The other one, general contempt of Mr. Biden. He sees him as weak, and he sees the West weak as whatever. He is talking of too often to China, I think, and then he has started this thinking, the West is weak, Corona has led to decline, and all this kind of Western decline thesis. Additionally, he was very upset that all his interventions in the American electoral system in 2016 and 20 has not paid off, and the second time he didn't win for Trump the elections. He knew that Biden is not under his control. He knew the Americans are pretty upset about all his interventions in American political situation. Biden called him a killer, he knows him very well, and so it was also personal in that context, and also a kind of a general discontent or underestimation of President Biden's resolve. And so he mobilized already the whole year 2021. Let's never forget, there was the spring mobilization, there was this enforced meeting of Geneva, which he got because of the mobilization, and then he escalated the whole summer in some vacillation, and then he prepared systematically taking the gold out of America, taking the gas out of Europe, and taking the money out of the European banks. He has systematically prepared this war with further build-up of troops. He has then put this ultimatum of the 17th December. He has then put all this recognition of the statelets on in February, and then he went all in the escalation of this tragic war in unprecedented cruelty, and he failed. And he failed with his four-pronged kind of attack, because his military was never able to do such a complicated operation. No military really would be, only the American one would have been able to do that, and no other military in the world at present condition would have been able to do such a military, completely crazy operation. It shows also his complete misconception of his own strength and of the weakness of the West. Yeah? Yes, Ukraine was prepared because Ukraine is now a nation under arms, and they were prepared because of 8 years of pro-Western military and technical training, and they were able, because of the complete overstretch of the system and because of the fast reaction of the Americans and the Europeans, especially the British and the Nordic, to really provide efficient weapons. But only America has saved Ukraine. Thanks a lot. Like you have saved us from the Nazis, saved us from the Soviets, you have intervened in the Balkans against Milosevic, you have saved us again from this terror regime. Thanks, America. So situation is, why he has then started this escalation. There can be various speculations as I've done it, but one thing is sure, there was no discrimination against Russian speakers in Kherson and Zaporizhia and in Kiev. People were speaking as well Russian there. You know, there was opposition. I met the opposition leaders. Yeah? It was free. It's a free country. Now, of course, it's much more restrained, many of the situations in Ukraine, because of the war situation. And that the hate now Russia is the consequences of this full-scale escalation with so many people dead. You should take that into account. And that I also say now no to Russia. And every decent human being must say no to Putin and Russia. It's the consequence of such a terror war and such a terrible escalation for no reason. I repeat, there is no reason to do that. There was no human rights violation before 2014 invasion, and also in the last years, Russian speakers. I was myself, one of my best friends is a Russian speaker. He was speaking Russian in all parts. We traveled together. Everybody was very friendly with him. Even, you know, ultimately, Russia, if you speak it very well, and you speak it high Russian, was always, even in a lot of subconscious situations, seen as a kind of highly educated language. Now it's seen as a language of a terrorism state, because of the terrorism the Russians have done. It will never be a cultural language anymore, but it's now the country which is endorsing brutal violence. Okay, it will be stained forever, the Russian people's legacy in the world, similar to what the Germans will be always living under the stain of Nazism. And Putin is now, for me, a similar dictator in line with Hitler, Stalin, Milosevic. This is the line. And Mao Zedong maybe. Putin has reached the level of horror which only few in history have reached in the 20th and 21st century. He started anyhow all the time, but we were carefully not to brand him like that. In Chechnya, many other internal crimes, the killing of his opposition leaders. He is now in that line. And I call, and also we should not forget, the MH17 and all the other terrible deeds which are him to account for, and he is held to hold responsible in front of world opinion, but also in front of the International Court of Justice. There should be now, in absentia, a clear court procedure, and he should be branded as a terrorist and as a war criminal, similar like Milosevic. We will probably never get him extradited, but he should be convicted for all his crimes, like officially and clearly and openly in a transparent proceeding where he will be not present, but we should be convicted because he's obviously guilty. I mean, never before since Hitler such a kind of a blatant, constructed and unbased aggression, to my best knowledge, the Soviet Union has always at least tried to somehow push the blame. That was Stalin and the others. They were always a master to invent some kind of theories. But this is blatant aggression, not even trying to hide. I mean, he's a war criminal. He's a terrorist. There is no way back. He must sit there in absence, like Mr. Putin, and he will be put on the criminal bench. And all the ghosts of the 300 people of MH17, the 15,000 people in the first Donbass war, and now all these people, they must be on the bench. Yeah? And then we will see. He will be guilty. There's no doubt about it. He is absolutely guilty. And then at least he should be nowhere anymore invited as an international condemned war criminal. That means no G20, no UN, no bilateral meetings, only people who want to sit with convicted war criminals. Yes. Then Mr. China can, Mr. Xi, sit with him. Mr. Modi, if you want that kind of company, if this is what India is about, sitting with war criminals, good. It's not a problem for me. I'm absolutely ready for that. But let's not give it here, there's a way back or something. Yeah? This is no longer the case. There is no way back for him. And we should make it absolutely clear. You know, there can be no negotiated peace with Putin. Yeah? There must be a Russia after Putin, post-Putin, or there will be no kind of trade or political cooperation. But he must lose now the G20, the world trade, he is more or less already out. Then, of course, out of the OSCE, absolutely. Absolutely, I cannot understand why he's still there. And out of the UN. He has betrayed the UN yesterday. I mean, this was extreme. At first negotiate a deal with Erdogan's help and Guterres in Istanbul or Ankara. And then they go in the next stage. And the next day he sends the missiles. I mean, this is the act of a madman, of a war criminal. So, for this alone, he must be excluded from the UN. Or Mr. Guterres resigns. There can be no other way. How can Mr. Guterres with his stay on as a Secretary General? Meet with Putin and say, oh yes, thank you Lord, we made a good deal. It was, Mr. Guterres has said, it's the best deal, the most important achievement of his time as Secretary General. He is now the second term. That is the most important achievement, is a deal which didn't last more than 12 hours. Okay, then Guterres must resign or Putin must be excluded from the United Nations. And that's anyhow much better, because he must be suspended absolutely. He has nothing to do in the United Nations. It's a United Nation for human rights and against fascism. Yeah? And Putin has created and has turned Russia in an openly fascist system. So that's very much against everything the United Nations is. So how can he stay on? How can he stay on? How can Russia be a rule maker, a rule giver, a global rule giver, when it's such a brutal dictatorship and a fascist state and a war criminal? I mean, he must be condemned, he must be sentenced, he must be ostracized, and Russia must be included from the United Nations because of the war, because of the annexation, Crimea, the first Donbass war, the second Donbass war, and of course the breaking a UN brokered agreement. I mean, this is outrageous crimes what he is committing, from Bucha to many others. This is Milosevic style. Just because, man, you can say nuclear powers have the right to be automatically in the UN, or what is it? Just because I will explode the world, I have to sit on the seat. What's the logic then? Just You know, like I commit suicide and so I must be important. I threaten the world with suicide and with complete destruction, so I must sit on the law-giving and rule-giving instruments of the world, good governance organization. Is this the logic? I don't think so. If you think like that, it's a very bizarre way of thinking. I cannot understand that. And it's for me completely unacceptable. And for anybody who is concerned about the United Nations. I mean, how we created it to have a world free from fascism. Then a fascist is sitting in the UN Security Council with a veto, lying the world every single day, agreeing with the Secretary General on a grain deal and putting the missiles the next day into the harbor town, which is essential. I mean, there can be no kind of form of cooperation after this. He must leave and he must be sentenced. He has gone too far already in 2014. In July with MH17 you might negotiate, you might say that was a mistake. And it was probably a tragic error because his crews didn't want to shoot down that passenger plane, but they wanted to shoot down a Ukrainian plane. That doesn't make it better for anybody. But of course you can say it was mistaken, kind of tragic mistake. But certainly everything else what happened in the last 5 months was on his orders. And certainly the missile strikes this morning were a reminder. We are now 5 months in this war and he is doing all these crimes and we are allowing it. So I ask myself, what kind of world governance can be provided by the United Nations? I don't see a way of return for Putin or Russia into the global world governments. At the cost, you know, staying is further delegitimizing, also losing all the legitimacy for this global body of governance. I mean, that's an absolute tragedy. And Mr. Guterres has to face very tough choices. Either to resign or to have Putin out. And he has to think. Yeah. For some people maybe that's a crisis then of the UN. Yes, it is a crisis. Yeah. I mean, Mr. Guterres has said in Turkey, this is the deal of the century, or his deal of the most important thing he has done for the UN, and the global food crisis has prevented, and all these things, all these superlatives. Now the situation has turned out like it is. He must either bear the consequences personally and let a more able operator who is hard on Russia, there will be some found, and who excludes Russia himself. If Mr. Guterres is not able for that, because he is too much connected to Russia or too unable to confront Russia, then he has to resign, or he has to make sure that Russia is leaving the UN and that the membership in the Security Council is frozen and Putin is put as a war criminal towards the International Court or Criminal Court. He must be prosecuted, he will be sentenced, and that's the way all criminal state leaders have to go. And that's the only fair and just way to resolve that situation. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have no better message than this, but this is absolutely what we need to do. Good. For peace, for Pax Europiana, I will keep you posted in the coming days. During the week I produced now a lot of videos to update you and to make it very clear that Putin is a war criminal, and who is actually defending him should please leave the European Union. We certainly don't need such people. You can leave to Russia, and good luck. Thanks a lot. All the best from Pax Europiana.